Dr. Lobsang Sangay says many freedoms of Tibetans are steadily being eroded. Earlier this week, he called on the Australian government to lobby for full Tibetan autonomy in China. Now, that would allow Tibetans to have representation in China's Congress. Speaking to me earlier, he warned other nations to be wary of China's expansionist policies.
When you see the South China Sea, East China Sea, Scarborough Island and Doklam, as you mentioned, between Bhutan and India, what we see is being, the same template played out in 1950s and 60s in Tibet. The invasion and occupation of Tibet started with the road. So Chinese promised highway for us and promised us peace and prosperity. Once the road was completed, Chinese trucks came, tanks came, guns came. That's how we got occupied. Tibet got occupied, So what you see now, it's the same, the Confucius-based nationalist expansionist policy with all the neighboring countries. So I'm here in Australia to remind the rest of the world, including Australia, that what happened to us could happen to you. In some sense, it's happening to you, so be careful.
And in terms of, for you, when you look at trying to maintain the culture and the traditions of Tibet, how despondent do you get looking at that expansionist policy?
At an individual community level, so it's more an assertion of the Tibetan people. Yet there is a system and a law imposed on Tibetans where Tibetan language is systematically discouraged. For example, middle school, high school, university level, the minimum instruction is Chinese, not Tibetan. Even Tibet University in Lhasa, and that's the capital city of Tibet, has more Chinese students than Tibetan students.
And you've described this as a sort of racism towards Tibet.
Yes, that's a blatant discrimination, Essentially, it's a cultural assimilation, making Tibetans into Chinese, make them study Chinese language, teach them through Chinese language. They want to teach even Buddhism through Chinese language. They want to teach Tibetan history, Tibetan astrology through Chinese language.
So your dream of an autonomous Tibet goes further and further away?
In the one sense, yes. But the resilience of the Tibetan people, sense of solidarity of the Tibetan people is very strong, It's the third generation of Tibetans in Tibet. They are asserting, they are protesting for environmental reasons, nomadic reasons, for farming areas, against hydropower, against minerals being exploited, for Tibetan language. So when you see this younger generation coming and asserting their Tibetan identity and aspiring for their dignity, that's encouraging. As you know, sadly, 149 Tibetans have burned themselves, committed self-immolation.
And do you condemn those self-immolations when they happen?
Categorically, consistently discourage self-immolation, and we have done so for this many years. Still, this year we had 4 self-immolations. Among them are farmers, nomads, young, old, monks and nuns. This is third generation Tibetans. They have not met with His Holiness Dalai Lama, they have not met us. Yet on their own, given the repression so systematic and so severe, they are protesting and burning themselves.
Have things been tougher under Xi Jinping?
In the last 4 years, unfortunately, it has been more tougher. Repression all over China has gone worse, and particularly in Tibet has gone worse. So that's why the Reporters Without Borders says that it's more difficult to get access to Tibet than North Korea. Freedom House says that the Freedom House Index in Syria is the least free region. The next is Tibet. So and how many people know about this?
And what do they fear from the Tibetans? Why do they fear you living culturally within China?
There is nothing to be feared because Tibetans are 6 million population and Han Chinese are 1.2 billion. We're just 0.5% of the population. Also, the PLA soldiers is more than 2.some million. So for almost every 2 Tibetans, there's a young, able, PLA soldier with automatic machine gun. There's nothing to be feared. And culturally, we are peaceful. And also what we pursue is non-violence. But I think what they fear is the truth. What they fear is the justice. And that level of mistrust against non-Chinese, That's Tibetans is so deep. Otherwise, they have given autonomy to Hong Kong, Macau, Chongqing, Shenzhen, and various parts of China as well. But for Tibetans, they're still refusing to give genuine autonomy.
And do you think it's perhaps your crusade externally from China? You're welcomed around the world, even if the Western powers don't recognize Tibet. Do you think that crusade works against that potential autonomy in China?
And it should not, because, I am democratically elected and I have the mandate, and what we pursue is non-violence, and what we ask is genuine autonomy as per Chinese laws, not independence or separation. So it's very reasonable. So the various capitals around the world should welcome and support.
You've mentioned that you want Australia to stand up and say and recognise the autonomy within China of Tibet. Do you feel abandoned by Western nations?
I won't use the word abandoned, but nonetheless, our Buddhist Tibetan mindset is those who meet with us, we welcome them. Those who don't meet with us, we say the Australian way, no worries. So given a choice, we feel the Australian leaders would also like to meet with us because our demand is very reasonable. American government supports one China policy and middle way approach of the Tibetan people, and Australian leaders can do the same. But I think there is this self-generated fear against Chinese government. And
but
Chinese
more than
leaders.
fear, China's invested money. There's a big business equation, and not just in Australia, but right around the world. They have made countries very interdependent with them.
I know there's element of greed as well.
You're a charming individual. You travel the world. How do you, though, do you think in a way your cause is more popular outside China, outside Tibet?
Inside Tibet, yes, the strong sense of solidarity is there. Among Chinese Buddhists also, increasingly so. And outside also, now because of the assertive nature of China, people are realizing, what is this China? China is becoming superpower, militarily, economically. But to be a superpower, true superpower, you have to earn respect. Respect you cannot buy or force. And by showing respect to Tibetan people, China can earn respect. So, I go around the world with the Buddhist sense of equanimity. So something good happens, appreciate it. Something bad happens, don't get too depressed. So with that mindset, you go and you just keep moving forward. You keep marching. That's the only way. That's how Gandhi did. That's how Nelson Mandela did. That's how Martin Luther King did. If you study even Aung San Suu Kyi, their biography, autobiographies, there are a lot of disappointments and tragedies. As you keep marching on, things change for the better.
Dr. Sangay, lovely to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Bever.
Lovely to see you.